So the first thing that I'm going to tackle is idea validation, i.e. the research phase of starting your app or starting your startup. And this is something that a lot of people want to skip over, but it is so important, and I cannot stress enough how important it is. When most people launch an app, the thing that they imagine will happen is that overnight it'll be a huge sensation. You'll see it on TechCrunch or TNW, and there'll be a headline like your app is a huge hit and you're the next Mark Zuckerberg. And this is because the media that we consume is hugely biased. We either see news stories on overnight sensations like the Pokemon Go app, or we see people having very, very public failures. And the truth is that in 99% of all the companies, of all the apps that get started or get built, the saddest thing is not failing publicly, but in fact, it's no one having ever noticed it existing. And that's what happens most of the time. So in order to ensure that your idea or your product has the highest chance of success, the most important thing is to do some form of idea validation or market or product validation. And if you're somebody like me, you'll probably have an idea every 5 minutes. Indeed, if I'm brushing my teeth, if I'm walking down the street, I will have an app idea or a business idea just pop up out of the blue. And the question is, how do you know which of these ideas are worthwhile? How do you know which one that you should pursue and which one is going to be a success? So that's what idea validation is all about. It's about getting feedback on your ideas, seeing if it's worth putting in the time, putting in the energy, putting in the money in order to make it successful. Now, one of your most important resources is not money, but it's actually time. This is the one non-renewable resource that we as all humans have. And that also means that if you spend a year working on an idea that eventually tanks and doesn't go anywhere, that's prevented you from working on your 10 other ideas, one of which could have been a success. So it's important to save yourself time as well as money in order to maximize your chances of success. Now, the other problem is that how do you know if your idea is actually a good one? And I love this sketch from Silicon Valley because it just describes so many people that if you've been in the tech industry for a while, you will come across terrible ideas from great people, usually when I'm riding at the back of an Uber.
You ever been lost in a parking lot before? Yeah. See, what my app would do was use existing AVL technology, right? So you would just type in the VIN number, and if your car didn't have AVL capabilities, you would just type in like what section of the parking lot you were in, like P3 or ground 7.
So you just write down what section of the parking lot you're in? I mean, why do you need an app for that?
So you can remember where you parked.
Right. But why don't you just write it down on a piece of paper?
Well, yeah, but this is for your phone.
Okay. So it's just sort of like Notepad?
Exactly. See?
Yeah.
You get it.
I get it.
Why can't all those fucking VCs?
I don't know.
Pussies, man.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so aside from being one of my absolute favorite shows, but it also illustrates a really valid point. There's a lot of people spending a lot of hours in their life on an idea that's probably not going to work. And the reason why I say it's probably not going to work, not because I have any, advanced insight or that I can predict the future, but it's because they haven't ever validated their idea on a buying customer or on a future user. So essentially, when we think about startup founders, we think, they're huge risk takers. They've quit their job. They've given up everything, remortgaged their house in order to do this thing. But actually, if you listen to somebody like Richard Branson, actually you'll notice that the thing that differentiates successful founders versus unsuccessful founders is that they want to limit their risk exposure. For example, when Richard Branson started Virgin Atlantic, he had a deal which allowed him to hand back the plane if it didn't work after a year. So unlike what the media portrays, startup founders are not these huge risk takers because nobody can predict the future. No matter how great your idea is, if the time is not right or if certain conditions aren't met, it just won't work. Why is it that the Palm Pilot didn't take off in the same way that the iPhone did? Because the time wasn't right. And there's things that you can't predict as a human, so you must validate. This is the progression that I see a lot of potential founders having in their head. And it's the idea of creating a prototype, then you use that to raise funding, then you build a great team, and then you put it out to the market, and then you have overwhelming success. Now, unfortunately, this rarely works. And I'm not saying that it never works. I'm sure there are examples, but this has a lower chance of success than an alternative pathway, which is where you validate the idea first in the market, see if there are people who are willing to download it or use it, depending on what it is that you're building, and then create the prototype, and then demonstrate that you've got traction, i.e. you've got growth, you've got more and more users, or they're spending more and more time in your product. And then you take that evidence and then you go and raise funding. This has a much higher chance of success than the previous one. So I think I've stressed the importance of idea validation enough. So let's look at some of the ways in which you can validate your idea for little or no cost.